You kill one person, yeah, I mean, sure, that's interesting, but come back to me when there's a string of them.
You know, right? Like, hit me after 3, bro. Like, come on. Even to a degree, I suppose I could be fascinated with, like, you just killed one person? You know,
yeah,
I don't want to be wild, but like, one?
Yeah, just doing the one.
You know, that seems wild. Like, I mean, kudos if that's all you got in you, like, but like, there's a lot of things I can't do once. You know, it's like in general. With potato chips, I'm not gonna eat one. With a movie, I tend to watch them multiple times. I'm not a watch it once and I'm over it kind of thing. So like, how that would carry on.
Is this some kind of like I say, neurospicy situation though?
Maybe it is.
You know, I'm watching this show for the 16th rerun because it's my comfort show.
Right.
You know, but you know, could it be your comfort murdering technique?
Maybe that's your comfort murder technique.
I lured this hitchhiker into my car for the 14th time because it, you know.
Yeah.
This is a Main Hustle Media podcast.
Virtual Reality Studios. A new realm of creativity.
What's up, y'all? Welcome to Matcha, Masala, and Murder. Blended besties, spill the tea. We are just a couple of mixed mates musing over matcha,
masala,
and murder. That won't get old for me at all. I am one of your co-hosts, your Sir Auntie Sharmane Fury, aka the Blazing Blurred. I am a Black Japanese British American currently living in Merida, Mexico. And I'm just, I don't know why I had an and there. That's it. That's what I wanted to say about who I was. Who are you?
I am Rhia. I am a Desi Welsh, Italian, Irish girl living in London, spreading my patented, trademarked version of mixed bestie energy and living my best life as a mother of a mixed race child in a cross-cultural marriage. And doing my thing on the internet, making mixed race communities, and now talking about murder.
So this is our episode 4, and we have been, slowly developing the show. We've kind of been pre-production throughout the summer, and then through the fall, we've been kind of recording when we've had chunks to be able to do it. And in the process of getting through the first 3 episodes, it occurred to us that we were making a wee bit of a mistake.
It suddenly dawned on us.
Like, it was in our description of our podcast that we were Matcha, Masala, and Murder, but we didn't call we just shorthanded the title of the show, Matcha, Masala. And it was like, wait a second. Why would anybody listen to it? Unless they were looking for tea.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, there's a podcast called Matcha, Masala. Let's check that out. And then, they pop up and they're like, wait, this is about murder. It just seemed like a miss.
Yeah. And I think because originally we had planned like different things as well before all the murder. There was a lot of other chat that we were going to do. And then we realized actually that we just want to talk about this.
We just want to talk about murder, right?
So yeah.
Like,
it made more sense.
Even in general, like for true crime-iness, it always tends to go in the murdery way versus like the missing or the this or the that or whatever, right?
Yeah.
I didn't realize how many factions of true crime-iness people fell into. Like, you could say like, oh, I'm into true crime, and then someone would go like, what's your thing? Like,
are
you into murder?
Specify the genre. Take it down for me.
And so like I used to have a coworker, an older lady, and we were both into true crime podcasts. But every time I'd be like, oh, you have to hear about this murder, and she's like, oh, I don't want to hear about it. And I'd be like, what? She was into the missing people.
Oh, just the missing?
Just the missing. That was
Just
her
the
deal.
missing.
And I was like, missing, I will listen to them, but they seem so unsatisfactory
I was
to
gonna
me because
say
they don't finish
there's
usually.
no resolution here.
Yes. And I think, and
Hmm.
so I like, oh, so we're in different camps. And then,
Yeah.
like of this thing. And then of course, like even amongst the murder people, there are like people more into serial killers and people more into just
Yeah.
general stories. And I think I tend down the serial killer path because
Samesies.
of my fascination of people's minds,
Yeah.
So
You kill
yeah,
one person, yeah, I mean, sure, that's interesting, but come
Like, it's
back to me
cute.
when there's a string of them.
right? Like, hit me after 3, bro. Like, come on, let's get into it. So, but yeah, because I'm more fascinated about like the brain chemistry, like the makeup
yeah.
of what
Yeah.
is the difference between your mind and a serial killer's mind, or
Mhm.
like even to a degree, I suppose I could be fascinated with like you just killed one person.
Yeah,
I don't want to be wild, but like one.
yeah, just doing the one. Yeah.
That seems wild. Like, I mean, kudos if that's all you got in you. Like,
But then, I mean, is it what? Okay, why did they just do the one? Because they got caught, in which case they were bad at it.
sure.
Because they literally didn't have it in them, pure like
Yeah.
literal crime of passion and circumstance,
Sure,
so
right.
that's how it ended up.
Revenge.
And yeah,
They only
or
needed to get one guy,
exactly,
and then
yeah,
boom,
they don't
you're
have a
done.
murderous nature. It was just
Yeah.
that guy really pissed me off.
Right. So
Or does it naturally follow that a serial killer is good at it because they're not getting caught? Or I don't. That's not actually always the case, is it?
it's
Because
not always the case,
no.
right? Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't know. I think I'm not unfascinated by a person who can only do it one time.
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's a lot of things I can't do once. Like in general, with potato chips, I'm not gonna eat one. With
Sure.
a movie, I tend to watch them multiple times. I'm not a watch it once and I'm over it kind of thing.
No.
So like, how that would
Is this
carry
some
on?
kind of like I say, neurospicy situation though? Because
Maybe
it's
it
like,
is.
I'm watching this show for the 16th rerun because it's my comfort show.
Right.
But could it be your comfort murdering technique?
Maybe that's your comfort murder technique.
I lured this hitchhiker into my car for the 14th time because it,
Yeah.
I'm so
Or
compelled
like,
to by my brain chemistry.
Yeah, your brain chemistry is saying you need to relive this. And I think
Yeah.
that tends to be when I really think about the people that I have become the most fascinated by, and not in like an idol worship type of way,
Yeah.
but literally like, why? I just am
Yeah.
so curious about why the brain works like that for some people that I need to understand it. I need to get it. And when you see
Yeah.
patterns in the way that people do it, those are the ones that I tend to like pay the most attention to. Like, was starting off with Graham the way that I did, like poison was his thing. That was what he did. He wasn't gonna slash this guy, poison that guy. It wasn't the method was important, for him.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the people that I end up learning most about or being the most interested in learning the most about end up being like that. They have a thing that they do and they repeat that thing.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I guess so. Yes, Matcha Masala murder. Apologies.
We're not just M&M, we've gone triple M.
and which is actually better for me in terms of my record keeping, because my other show is militantly mixed, which I also my editing nomenclature is MM whatever the episode is. So now I have MMM whatever the episode
I've got
is.
MRM and MMM now.
Right. So like it's helpful to do this, but also right out of the gate what it is we're talking about. We're T fans that are talking about murder. It's funny because I started noticing that, and I wasn't really aware of that until you and I started to talk about doing the show together, how many true crime podcasts are like formed around a beverage.
What do you like to drink when you discuss murder?
Yeah, there's like the wine girls, and then there's like the coffee people. There's like the pub people, like the
the wine pairing and the
stuff like that. So I mean, I'm here for the tea pairings eventually. Obviously, we're new, so no one's sponsoring us yet. But like any tea companies out there, you want to give us some teas that we can pair. You're just gonna have to send some to Mexico and to the UK. So this
is a fruity little number that would go quite well with a cereal throttler.
Exactly, a cereal throttler. Exactly.
So if you are a tea company, that's the sort of thing you could get from us.
That's what you can get from us. That's the level we're bringing. And like I've been always. I mean, you and I both have talked about like if we're talking about just like British black tea, like you could be pretty basic with us. We'll be fine. The builders, the number ones, the English breakfast, stuff like that. Like just get us with a nice, hearty, robust black tea. But I've been there's a Mexican tea that I've just tried that's like piña coco, pineapple and coconut, which I'm usually not a fruit tea person. I've become really obsessed with this because it's really delicious. So I just need to find the proper murder to pair it with so that I can talk about it.
I'm thinking something tropical.
Tropical murder. We'll see what's out there. So I'm starting to think like this is so true. This is how my day-to-day life is. It's just like I'm about to make this cup of tea and I'm like, what true crime would work with this?
I actually bought a box of tea. I was in the queue. I was in line at the to pay for my goods at the shop or the store. I'm doing my own translations now. And I saw it on the shelf. It was an impulse purchase because it was right by the till. And I was like, yes, I have to get this and then on the way home, I was driving home and I was like, have I stumbled upon the best career ever? Because now I can legitimately write off tea as an expense.
Right.
Like, this is incredible. Like, what have I done?
Honestly, as a person for both of us that come from multiple tea cultures, to find a way to write off the staple of from morning to night. I mean, my day starts English tea and ends Japanese tea. Like that's the cross, right? Like if I can figure out how to write that off, it would be brilliant.
There it is. We're doing it.
I think we've hit the nail. Like it was cute us trying to be little mixed race podcasters for all these years. What we really were supposed to be. Is this
sipping the tea, spilling the tea? That's what we're all about.
That's what we're about. So now that we're a few episodes in too, it also occurred to me that like the visual audience, because we're a YouTube podcast, get what's happening when we translate the different American and British phrases and stuff like that. There's a little pop sound that defines it on the screen. But for those of you who are listening to the audio only, these pops are inexplicable. And what is happening on the screen is you will say something like leg it, and I will pop up the definition on the page so that people can see what you're talking about. Or when we say line versus queue, those will be a thing. I also occasionally have a Sharmane phrase that is neither American nor British, like switchies. When we're talking about like swapping food.
And then I said swapsies. Yes.
So you said swapsies. So like, we have things. I feel like you and I have a level that we kind of speak each other's language accidentally, but maybe the rest of the world doesn't. And so
that would be reasonable, to be fair.
Yes. So we felt like we should define some of the shit that we say. So I just thought it's like, I didn't want it to kind of pass without acknowledging that. So the other part too is if you've been listening, I've literally had to first of all, in the first episode, I couldn't pronounce the name of the poison and I didn't realize it until later how wrong I was. And so I've had to record the correct say. So there's all these I'm talking normal and then all of a sudden I'm like antimony. Oh no, I said it wrong again. Antimony.
She's learned nothing, people.
I've learned nothing. I've learned nothing. And so so the first, we're working out the kinks. We're learning together, even though we're semi-seasoned podcasters. Like this is a totally different game than we're used to playing. So so the first couple episodes, it's the kind of stuff that's making me laugh as I'm editing, because I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to re-record anything. Because we're surprising each other with our stories every week. So I'm not gonna be like, can we re-record Graham? Like,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
we had the moment we had.
That was my organic response. I
was
can't
right.
I can't replicate that at the drop of a hat.
Right. And I would hate if we had to do something like that. So yeah, I think, episode
Plus, we're
4,
working with a like 6 or 7 hour time difference, so
that too, right?
organizing that can be tricky.
So yeah, that's here we are. Matcha, Masala, and Maîr. And honestly, I fucking love it better. Like, why did it take us so long to get here? It's so. No, you're right. You're right. We had plans of like breaking down different things.
Yeah.
The more we got into it, the more we were like, let's just.
So it worked, but I think with everything, you have an idea and it takes one form, and then you springboard from that to a different iteration, and it kind of it grows organically as we're finding stuff out. And I think that I've said organically twice. That's really wanky. Sorry. But it does actually make sense to kind of roll with it and see how things play out. And actually, I think it's weird if you don't lean into that. Then if we hadn't leaned into this and changed it, we would have kicked ourselves further down the line and thought,
if we were
really
a year in,
you can't do it then.
Terrible, right? Yeah, it would have been.
Yeah.
And honestly, like. And to be fair, you and I are still getting to know each other. We've technically only known each other online for like 4 months. 4 or 5 months. So
exactly.
Our relationship is growing as we're also working on this thing together, and it's just I don't know. I'm enjoying it. I'm having a blast. I also really appreciate that I'm not the only goober. So
I'm right there with you.
Thanks for goobering with me. That's pretty much all I didn't have. So yeah, that's the level of preparedness I had today was let's address the elephant in the studio of our name, and then we can get into it. So you and I had a break of a couple weeks.
Yeah.
So we haven't even gotten really the chance to talk about a new murder I've been living in the
previous one
of our previous recording. So I'm chomping at the bit. I'm ready to hear what you have for us, and if you're ready to jump in, I'm ready to jump in.
I'm gonna lay it on you. Yes, I'm ready. Shall I be mother?
I love that.
It is I, and I am going to be mother today. And I feel like I might need to explain that. Have we explained that?
So, you know what? We haven't actually.
Yeah.
For the non-British audience, we do need to explain
non-British people. Shall I be mother? If you bring out a tea tray with a teapot and some teacups and the milk and the sugar, and then the person who is going to pour out the tea for everybody, they say, shall I be mother? Which means, shall I pour the tea? So that's why, considering we're taking it in turns to tell these stories, like I'm being mother because today I'm pouring the tea. So that's where that comes from. This and many other tea-related puns can be found every week here with us. So today I am going to talk to you about the Bandit Queen of India.
Ooh, I already love it from the title alone. I don't know shit, but let's get into it.
So this is now a little disclaimer. First of all, a little trigger warning, because obviously we know what we're talking about. We're talking about murder and stuff here. So there's always going to be something grisly or gory. But just for anybody who needs to know, we are talking, there's a lot of essay in this story. Okay. And so I just want everybody to know that ahead of time. I don't go into any details about that, but it happens, and I'm going to reference the fact that it's happened. So there we go. And the other thing to say is that it's not your usual kind of murder situation. Oh, the body count is high, but it is not your usual kind of murdery situation.
Okay.
So I was umming and ahhing about this one, but I was so engrossed in this tale that I had to bring it up, and I just thought it was going to work really, really well. So we're in India, which is obviously where most of my family is from. So this really spoke to me because we're doing women who kill, and we're doing ethnic women who kill, which is, ticking a lot of boxes so far. And she's got a cool ass nickname, the Bandit Queen of India, which I'm here for. So, and with all that being said, allow me to tell you the tale. So we're going all the way back to 1963. So it's also not as far back as I would normally go.
Okay.
But we're going with it. So born in 1963 in Uttar Pradesh, which is a state in the north of India. So for people who don't know, India is split up into different states. And there are specific things that are to do with every state, but there are commonalities across the whole country. But it's a really, really big country, right? With millions and billions of people. So things,
a lot of languages, a lot of ethnic communities,
exactly, different religions.
Yeah.
It's massively different. So if you know about the country, then saying this is where she's from, like, people would infer certain things, but you don't really need to know that for the purposes of this, but it's just to, for education purposes. Another thing in India is that they have the caste system, which is a controversial system, which isn't really like the class system that we have in the West, but it's basically like a way of ordering society based on religious and cultural kind of norms, which have been in play for hundreds of years. And it divides up society into a hierarchy. That's how it is a bit like class. And according to what level you're on, you kind of garner more respect. It means you can only work particular jobs depending on which strata you're in, and you're deemed more or less worthy. And by association, you'll have more or less money, or live a better life. And it's an awful thing. It's a root of a lot of problems.
And you can't work out of the systems, right? It's not like you can't merit out of them.
Yes, exactly. Okay. No, you can't get your way out of them. It would be really unusual to marry someone from a different caste. It does happen, obviously, and it happens more and more now. Certain religions don't subscribe. Buddhists, Sikhism was built to kind of disestablish the caste system because it was built on the idea that everybody should be equal. And some people care about it more than others, is what I'm saying. But at this time, when we're talking about, this was a big deal, and it was absolutely solid in all of India. So basically, there are something like 3,000 subcastes as well. So like, it's a hugely complicated thing.
I cannot comprehend that at all.
Exactly, right? So all you need to know for today's purposes is that our Bandit Queen was born in 1963 and was part of a caste which is boatman or fisherman is their kind of role and job and profession.
Okay.
And it is a low down one. So it's not a high caste, it's a low down one. And her family were living in poverty. She was the youngest of, I think some reports differ, so at least 3 older sisters above her. And then there was her, the youngest. And having girls is expensive because you have to marry them off and you need a dowry. And the family did not have a lot and they weren't wealthy. They lived in poverty. And of course, poverty there and then is very different from what we might think of it in the West. They literally didn't have basic things. There had been some kind of dispute with neighboring families about a patch of land and who owned it. And it may be that at some point our family had owned it, but right now it's been taken away from them. They've lost it in this dispute. So for some time, it's really been without anything. So it became very necessary for her to be married off because it would be one less mouth to feed in the household, etc. So her parents, when she got to the ripe old age of 11, her parents decided, it was going to be impossible for them to come up with a dowry. They weren't going to be able to marry her off in that way. So they sold her into marriage with a very much older man because he gave them a cow and a bicycle. And that's how he bought her as his wife. Culturally, it's like this.
Okay.
Bizarre.
Sorry. Question.
Yeah.
The families have to give the families of the girls have to give a dowry, but the groom family has to.
No, so normally, if you're the girl getting married, your family would give you a dowry to take to like to sort of increase your chances or make yourself seem more appealing because you're coming with this wealth.
Right.
And there wouldn't be wealth or finance coming from the groom's side to the girl's family normally. But in this situation, because she didn't have a dowry, she wasn't desirable. No man would want to marry her. So then we enter this old guy who hasn't been able to get anybody to marry him thus far. And he quite liked the idea of having a young wife. So he was willing to accept no dowry because she was young, which was a bonus. And in actual fact, he then gave them a cow and a bicycle because she was young and she was being married off sooner than she might otherwise. So he recognized that was a bit of compromise on their part, right?
Okay.
So this man was nearly 3 times older than her, and she had a really bad time. He repeatedly raped her and abused her and was physically abusive to her. So she was having an awful time. She kept running away and running back home to her parents. And every time she got back home, they sent her back to him. And this went on for 3 years when she eventually left him. And well, actually, it was because he kicked her out and took her back to her parents and said she's not performing her wifely duties. She's not, living up to my expectations. So I would like to return this product that I have purchased. Whether or not he got his cow and bicycle back, I don't know. At that point, of course, she had a failed marriage. And so she was considered an outcast by society. This was this was a terrible thing. Like, what kind of woman can't be a good wife? So she brought shame to her whole family, and they didn't really want her around because they didn't have the money to start feeding her again, etc. So that is the humble beginning of the Bandit Queen, whose name I should actually tell you, which I realize I have not yet revealed. Yeah, total pro. Her name is Phoolan Devi, and we're going to fast forward a bit in her story now. So we last saw her when she'd been married for 3 years. She's been returned home, and she is now fast forward to 1979. That's where we're going to leap to. She's trying to make her way at home with her parents, even though they don't really want her, but she's in and around this village. She gets accused of theft. So she and another girl get accused of stealing from a nearby family. And she didn't actually steal anything, but whatever. She gets sentenced to 3 days in jail. So she spends 3 days in jail. I don't know what happened to the other girl. I don't think she spent 3 days in jail or any time in jail. Perhaps she came from a slightly better family that could buy her out of that situation. So our poor Phoolan is in prison and jail for 3 days, and the police treated her really badly and beat her and raped her, and this will be a common theme. So this is what I'm saying about the mention of that, even though I'm not going to go into any detail about it. So she's having a bad situation. This is a bad time already. Then a few years later, she spent those 3 days in jail. She's doing her thing. She's still a single woman. She's technically no longer legally married anymore to that guy, because eventually I think the marriage was dissolved. A few years later, she gets kidnapped by a band of what's called dacoits, which dacoits means bandits, or banditry. And this is a term the East India Company, when they were doing all their colonial stuff out in India, they put in place a lot of different laws about what you could and couldn't do. And one of the laws they put in was against dacoits and thuggee. And that's where we get the word thug in English. So thuggee or thuggy is like how you would say that. And so dacoit and thuggee are like kind of just part of the cultural goings on, bandits and robbers and all that kind of stuff. And so there was quite a problem in society with groups of it wasn't like organized crime. These are just poor people trying to make their way, and they're trying to rob richer people than them. That's what they do.
Which I fully support.
Exactly. So they're just, everybody's just getting by. So she gets kidnapped by this group. And while she's there, she sort of ends up kind of joining the gang and becoming like a dacoit herself. And she meets this man, Vikram Mala, who she falls in love with. And this is great because he falls in love with her too. And they have this lovely time. And then the head of the gang captures her and sort of takes her off and rapes her. And so she suffers really badly under him. And Vikram, who is in love with her, wants to avenge her. And so he and Phoolan make a plan to kill the big boss of the gang. Unfortunately, as part of this plan, things don't go quite according to plan. Anyway, long story short, they do kill the head of the gang. And they get married to each other. And he's protected her. And she, this is the first time a man has not done the bad thing to her and has actually looked after her. But they're very much in love. They get together. She's a fully fledged member of the gang. In fact, she's basically the de facto leader at this point, because that's just how things have panned out. So this is finally, things are turning around.
Right, yeah.
Together, they romped the countryside with their gang. They're robbing trains. They're raiding upper caste people's homes. They're kidnapping. There might be a bit of murdering going on, but
I'm kind of with it.
A bit sketchy. I know. I know.
Under the circumstances, I'm kind of with you. Let's do it.
So at this point, she and the gang and Vikram, they decide this is her plan. They go back to the village where her ex-husband lives.
Ooh.
Right. So one night they storm into the village. Nobody's expecting it. She stabs him and she drags him out into the streets and parades him in front of all the other villagers as a warning to men who marry little girls and men who treat women badly. Right. So, it's good. It's good. You should not take wives that are younger than you. You shouldn't be getting on with underage girls. These are children. This shouldn't go on. It shouldn't be socially acceptable. So this was her big moment of revenge, which he did die after the stabbing. And, she left him there as a warning in the streets so everybody would know. So she's, trying to take the power back, which I think is an important aspect to most of what she kind of gets up to. So she's proved herself a really valuable member of this gang, and the people in it, the guys, are actually quite happy to have her in charge. And there's no issue with her being a woman or anything. This is going well for them. They're looting. They're doing all right. And every time they do a raid or a big robbery, she goes to the temple and she worships this particular goddess to thank her for the fruitfulness of what's happened. And she asks for more protection. And that's just the life that she's leading, going about. And they travel from quite wide range across the country. And so if we fast forward again, two men who used to be members of the gang come back. They have been away for a while. And these two guys are upper caste men. So they're a higher class of higher caste of robber. And they return and they realize what's happened, that the ex-leader of the gang has been killed. And when they find out who's done it, they are not happy at all, because for them, the worst part about this is that the leader was killed by subordinates, but not just subordinates, people of a lower caste, because both Vikram and Phoolan were a lower caste. So they are outraged because this is just not the way things are done. This is just not the done thing.
Amazing that in Banditry he would still hold the hierarchies of the caste. Right? That's wild.
Yeah. So even within the criminal underworld, we're still sticking to the rules.
Not the highest level within the your existing caste anymore as a bandit. So why are you holding to these? That's
right. So they decide this can't go on. So they make a plan. They conspire to kill Vikram and Phoolan, obviously, because revenge. It's a tale as old as time.
Sure.
They did manage to kill Vikram, which is heartbreaking because he was the nice guy who looked after our girl.
Yeah.
So they did manage to kill him. But what they did was they kidnapped her. So here's more kidnapping. And they kept her as a prisoner and they locked her up in a village. They went to a village called the Bemai village, which was a bit of a journey away, but not super duper far. And they kept her locked up, literally in a room, chained up in this place. And you guessed it, while she was chained up, they took it in turns. She was hideously beaten. And even the men from the village just had free access. And that's what happened to her. She was gang raped and repeatedly abused. So this was the most hideous attack on her thus far, even worse than everything she'd suffered before. About 3 weeks later, after she'd been paraded in the street naked and the men had been invited, by her captors to come and just do whatever they wanted, she'd been really suffered these public indignities as opposed to the private behind closed door ones. And about 3 weeks later, after all this terrible time, she manages to escape with the help of a couple of girls from the village, which is awesome. So girls supporting girls. So she legged it. That's what she did. Of course she did. I had to say it.
Still my favorite.
So what did she do? What could she do? She can't go home. She's, cut all her ties with being at home. she's not got an ex-husband anymore because she's killed him. She's not got a current second husband anymore because he's been killed. So, what could she possibly do except start her own gang, right? Now she gets to make her own rules. Hell yes. So she starts her own gang, and I think, and again, this is really tricky when reports differ. This really annoys me because even when we try our best to figure stuff out, sometimes things just don't become very clear. I think the gang might have been called the Malas, which is Vikram's surname, which I think is really romantic and adorable.
Right,
she would name her gang that. Yeah. But there are differing reports, so that could just be a bit of artistic license embellishment after the fact. They ranged over central and northern India, and they are hiding out in mountains, and they know secret passageways through ravines and special places to escape, and it's proper banditry now. Like, this is a top tier banditry. And the best thing that they did, which was the one thing she wanted to do, was they raided and robbed upper caste people, and they spread the wealth amongst the poor people. She's like a female Robin Hood.
That's my favorite. I swear, I love a Robin Hood tale that's like that.
Good. So they would find themselves in villages where the landowners were taking advantage or not paying properly the laborers and the menial workers. And so whenever they spotted this level of injustice, they would get offed, or they would just get beaten up, or they would have their shit stolen, and it would be spread out to bring fairness to the people who were suffering. And I, again, don't hate that. I'm having a problem with disliking this woman.
I really don't. Even now, I'm just like, where are all our Robin Hoods? Just like, exactly. I'm really. I mean, I don't have a skill set to do the things. Like, I'm really rooting for some Robin Hood hackers and shit.
Yeah. I was gonna say, we need it for the digital age, don't we?
Update it. Let's do it. Let's get it together.
Spread that Bitcoin around. So this is what she's doing. She's fighting injustice. She's helping the needy. She's stopping people being exploited. She's helping women. She's in charge of her own gang. She's a feminist dream. And then we do one more fast forward, and that brings us to 1981. And this is a very important time. Valentine's Day, 1981. This is her plan. She's got it all planned. It's so cinematic, her thinking and what she does. She returns to the Bamai village, the scene of her biggest indignities, to seek more revenge.
Hell yeah.
She dresses in khaki like the police would, because the police in India, they wear all the khaki uniforms. But she puts on this bright red lipstick, and she's got a megaphone. She walks down the street, and she's got all her guys with her crew. And she parades down the street with this megaphone, and she calls for all the men who assaulted her to come out and face her on the street.
Fuck yes. I'm so excited. I can't wait.
She's walking up and down. She's like, saying whatever she's saying to get these guys to come out and face her and look her in the eye. And they don't come, surprisingly or unsurprisingly. So they couldn't find them. I think maybe they found one or two, but they couldn't find them. So you know what she says? She says, okay, every man in this village, get them out here now. So they drag out 21 men, line them up, and she says to her guys, firing squad, kill them all.
Whoo!
If you won't confess to me, she takes them all out in one fell swoop.
Wow.
And that was the Valentine's Day massacre of 21, sometimes 22 men of 1981.
Okay.
And at this point, she has been given this title of the Bandit Queen, and legend is raging around the country of her and what they've been up to and their raids. Like I said, before, she was blowing up trains and everything. Dolls are being sold in the markets to little girls of her.
I was literally just imagining I'm painting a real revolutionary painting with her with just her blade and just a titty out or something like that. Just burning shit to the ground.
Just a good measure,
just nothing's more empowering than a single titty hanging out.
It's like those medieval paintings when it was fashionable, when the women would just do that.
Just
what? There's that woman. There's one painting. She's like, I was just really proud of my left tit, so I just used to get it out.
It's a good one. It's the one I want everybody to see. We all got one.
So these, the dolls didn't have tits out, but it was some kind of Barbie-core before it was Barbie-core situation going on.
Yeah.
So This was big news though, and everybody knew about it, and everybody knew she had done it, and she was in charge. She was not anonymous by any stretch. So by 1983, so that's 2 years after, she'd been in contact with the police, and they'd been saying, "Come on, just surrender." There was like £10,000 on her head for anybody who would, turn her in or whatever. But they were so good at hiding, and the hills, there were these tiny ravines and nooks and crannies, and that's just where they lived, and they could just survive there. If you know the pathways and everything, you could survive for years, get food and water and everything, and not need to come out. But she negotiated with the police. It took nearly a year of negotiations backwards and forwards for her to say, "I will surrender." And this is the list of demands that I wanted to let you know, because she was like, "I'm not just coming. Like, I'll tell you how this is going to go.
Be worth it. Let's go."
So she would only deal with selected police forces because she didn't trust the police anymore after they had been some people to attack her.
Fair.
She would only lay her weapons down and give them up before pictures of Gandhi and the goddess Durga, who she had been praying to when she went to the temple after every raid. Okay. And she wouldn't lay her guns down in front of the police because she didn't give a shit about the police. She didn't hold any respect for them. But Gandhi and, the goddess, she wouldn't mind doing that. She wanted to be promised that they would not give her the death penalty. This was very important.
Okay.
And she wanted a promise that all her men would serve no more than 8 years in jail for all the crimes that they had done under her name. She wanted a plot of land for her family, because as we know, her family had been without land for some time and unable to survive. Okay. And then she wanted her family brought under a police escort to the site of her surrender, which was going to be this big public affair, so that she could see them, one more time or whatever. But she wanted them brought safely. Because they probably would have been getting a lot of hassle because publicly everybody knew she was their daughter. So at a time of her choosing, not whenever they said, like something out of a film, again, I keep finding this so cinematic, rifle slung over her shoulder, knife at her hip, ammo strapped across her body, the Bandit Queen strolls out of a ravine with 250-foot walls in a gap only big enough for a single person, and walks over to one unarmed policeman who she has allowed to accept her, and surrenders. And then her other guys come out behind her,
Beautiful.
So she set this beautiful scene, and then she arranges her formal surrender, which was in front of a crowd of over 10,000 people have shown up to watch this. There's 300 police. There are the chief ministers of different states and different government agencies. And they were so surprised when they saw her, because she had just become this legendary thing, that people had talked about, but you couldn't really capture her, and there weren't many photos of her, up to this point. She's less than 5 foot tall.
I was waiting for her to be the tiniest thing.
Yes. She's this teeny thing. Well, and she's the one who's called all the chaos, all because she wanted to disrupt the natural order of the fucking patriarchy and the awful caste system. It's just this tiny little lady with her red lipstick and her khaki outfit and her rifle. She was charged with 48 crimes in total, 30 charges of dacoity, which is the banditry, and kidnapping, and 22 murders, possibly 23. So that's either 21 or 22 men in the Valentine's Day, plus the ex-husband, or, we're not sure.
Okay, gotcha, yeah.
So she gets sent to prison. She stays in prison for 11 years before she even faced a trial.
How?
So
I'm so sick of this kind of stuff. Look. Come on, man.
This is a not uncommon situation in India even now. But yeah, she's there for 11 years. They have agreed to her demands, that she hasn't been given the death sentence, obviously. I'm not entirely sure how long each of the men served. It does vary because not all of them even were caught at this time she first surrendered.
And did they need trials to get to the 8 years, or was it if they were there for 8 years?
I think it would have needed. I think she was intending that they would have a trial and be sentenced to no more than 8 years. So some of them had probably been in prison for 11 along with her by this point.
Oh, damn. Okay.
But she hadn't been given the death penalty. And in 1994, she was released from prison after 11 years. and all the charges against her were set aside, and she was just served with, time served.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So basically, a fisherman boatman leader from her original village had persuaded the officials that she had served all this time, and look at what she was doing, and look at what she had faced, and he pleaded her case.
Oh, wow.
And somehow the government of Uttar Pradesh dropped the charges against her.
Yes.
And so she walks out after 11 years. And at this point, she converts to Buddhism because there's no caste system. She gets married to another dude, and she becomes a politician. In 1996, she's elected as a member of parliament to the Samajwadi Party, which is like the main challenger to the super right-wing Hindu nationalist party.
Wow.
And she lives in this beautiful bungalow with her husband, and she's righting wrongs and making laws and, taking names. And that's how she lived out her days until, very sadly, in 2001, at the age of 38, she was shot dead by 3 masked gunmen in front of her house in Delhi.
What the?
So they drive up in a car, and people say that they were trying to get revenge for the 21 massacred in Valentine's Day, right? 10 men were arrested, 9 were acquitted, and 10 years later, one of them went on trial and was found guilty of her murder.
Wow.
In that intervening time, 70 more cases of murder, kidnapping, and banditry had been brought against her and were open during that time, but she was never charged with those. They were just hanging over her head.
From like the past, they just decided to bring it all back.
It's just more investigation had been done and more crimes had been linked to her as things had panned out over the years. Thousands of people attended her cremation, which was on the banks of the Ganges River. She had become this folk hero so strongly to lower caste people, to women. And at her cremation, which is a big do, and basically her parents had wanted it to happen way back home, like near her actual birthplace. But the political party said, look, she's got so much support and there's going to be so many people here, it needs to be more formal. And that's why it was done in such a formal place. There were thousands of police in attendance. Shit kicked off. There was one hand grenade thrown. Lots of people got pickpocketed. Loads of people were stoning passing vehicles. And there were loads of chants in support of her when the flames went, and her husband watched on and lit her funeral pyre. And so that is really the end of her story. Except to say, in 1994, a film was made. I think there have been 2 films made, but this is the most sort of popular one. And she had never been happy with this film. She said it depicted her as a sniveling little woman, and she was not here for that at all. In her quote, she said, "In the film, I'm portrayed as a sniveling woman, always in tears, who never took a conscious decision in her life. I'm simply shown as being raped over and over again. And rape," she added, "was a fact. It was just a fact of life for lower caste women. And across the whole subcontinent, they were just generally regarded as property for the rich." So this was, from her point of view, although what happened to her was torturous and awful, an ordeal, it was not by any means an uncommon thing. And she saw herself as the same as all the other women, which is why she wanted to try and change things as much as she could. So 24 years after she's died and she's been killed, the police captured one of the original gang members who kidnapped her and Vikram, the guys that came back.
The upper caste guys?
Exactly, yeah. So they capture one of these guys, and they charged him with more than 24 cases of kidnapping for ransom and some murders and dacoities against... they charged him because he'd been doing all sorts of other banditry in the meantime. And it turns out he was also involved with the murders of 16 members of her crew. So the crew that she went on to form, the Malas, like he had gone and taken out a lot of those guys in the meantime as well. And so from up to 1984, he was still seeking his revenge in his ways. But then 24 years after she had been murdered, he gets caught. He does get sentenced to prison, but he is the only one who ever gets done for all of that stuff from back in the day.
Dang.
And that is the end of our story of the Bandit Queen of India, who, although not a serial killer or murderer in that way, is responsible for the death of 22 men who fucking deserved it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm emotionally, mentally, and sexually attracted to this woman at this point. Like I'm just like, yes, let's do this. Gosh, it's like literally everything that I would dream in like a woman folk hero type of person, like to be a beacon of kind of hope even for other girls that were in the same type of situation as she was. Oh my gosh, like what a life.
And that's why, although I was like, oh, you know, it does. I was like, am I bending the rules of murders here?
I mean,
but I was like, I think we can work with this, because I got so excited when I was reading this story. I was like, come on, like, and who else is going to be talking about this? Because even if some people are, I just really thought we owed it to her to tell her story, which sounds really cheesy, but I think she deserves to be talked about. And you know, she's born into this situation. That is her lot, and she faced such a lot, but she also stuck two fingers up to most of it and said she wasn't going to put up with it.
And how many women over many hundreds of years have been like potentially that woman, right? Like a person who has been in that situation their whole life and have found either the strength, the courage, or whatever it was to be able to fight back at that level. And you know, I mean, maybe some dirt was done, you know, that wasn't necessary, you know, aside,
sure,
like, you know,
sure,
let's go ahead and say that that's possible. But the, you know, the idea that she kind of took into her own hands, her own, or like her destiny, like she took over, like, and it's not a perfect system. She also continued to still be, you know, raped or kidnapped or anything, even while she was doing all that. But I think that is it's real hopeful. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, I'm not a person that's normally very hopeful, but like that's a kind of a hopeful
I think the fact that it was really amazing to me that she was able to make all these demands and negotiate how she was going to surrender and on what terms. You know, they must really have been scared of this woman and the havoc she was wreaking and what she represented. Obviously, they wanted to stop and stamp that out. And the fact that they would say, okay, yeah, we'll give in to these demands. And then, I mean, no one's thinking that spending 11 years in prison is going to have been fun for her. But the fact that she gets out, I mean, obviously, she was there for 11 years without even a bloody trial. I mean, that's insane. Appalling. But then she just gets out and they just let her go. And
she becomes a politician. Yeah. Like, how wild is that? Like,
she's not done changing things yet. And now she decides, okay, I'm going to work with the law to change this as best I can.
What's amazing about that from like the American perspective of where in our society, we make this claim that you pay your debt to society, right? Like you go to you get sentenced, you go to prison, and however long you're in prison, once you're released, technically on paper, your debt is paid. And yet you can no longer hold, if you had a felony, you can no longer vote. So you're now a person that is not represented within politics. And in a lot of cases, it's weird in which sometimes you can hold office and sometimes you can't hold office. You know, like it's really unclear within our system in some cases. I mean, how amazing would it be that you could be a felon that can't vote, but you can somehow hold an office in some positions? Very weird in the United States. So to think about something like that, where like you could be, you know, technically a criminal and, you know, actually pay your debt to society in a way that the society has accepted this debt is now paid and you can move on to this new phase of life. And that new phase of life include now working within the system to try to make change. Like that, to me, that seems like the most empowering type of dream that I think the concept of the United States of America should have been like.
That's such a good point.
So that's interesting. I think, from my perspective, having grown up in the States, that's how I'm taking that. Like that system would have made sense to me if we've agreed collectively she paid her debt. And now she wants to work within the system. I mean, it's kind of like us sitting here wondering how Nelson Mandela was able to become the president after apartheid, right? Like, he was in prison for
and he was labeled as a terrorist,
and he was labeled as a terrorist
beforehand. That's that's how people. That's what his label was at that time.
And that wouldn't be something that could happen where I grew up, So to see that it could happen in somewhere else, like I feel very empowered and motivated by this story, even though I'm probably not going to become a bandit queen, and I'm probably.
But I think we all want to be a bandit queen.
We do kind of. I think so. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm from the UK, so we don't have guns. So, but so maybe I wouldn't take the rifle and stuff, but the knife and the lipstick and the costume. I'm.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm Japanese. Throw me some double swords, and I'm with it. Like that speaks to me deeply. That's amazing. I mean, it's so crazy to think like she was alive doing this shit while we were children. Like,
exactly.
Like every time you said a year, I was like, okay, I was 4. Okay,
that's exactly what I did the whole way.
Like
I was working it out. I was like, what? Oh my god! Yeah,
that's amazing.
So look, I mean, am I condoning the indiscriminate killing of men? Even though they may not have actually been the ones who committed a crime against her, but they represented the men who did. Possibly not. But at the same time, are they all complicit in the crimes? Yeah. So, I mean,
that's a good topic of conversation that I feel like, depending on the circumstance, my position would be different. You know, of course, in this particular case, I don't hate it. Like if you're a person that is protecting a rapist, a murderer, like a gross murderer, not like a protection, self-defense or protection or anything like that. Like I find it a little bit harder for me to go like, no, they didn't I mean, yes, technically, but also no, like it's hard for me to go that far. I think I have I mean, okay, I think this is going to be the 15th time I will have said this on this episode alone. As a Japanese person, like revenge is a big part of my interests.
That was so perfect.
I've never been able to commit revenge in the way that I have fantasized about committing revenge, and it's like literally something that most of my friends know about me, that like I am a vengeful.
Listen, I'm married to a Sicilian. Vengeance is everything.
I mean, come on, like. I mean, the revenge tales that we have in Japanese history and in our folklore are so deep that like I find myself in certain revenge tales really cheering for the person that gets the revenge. And then in my own personal life, in which I have like fantasized about revenge about people that have harmed me, it's kind of like what I was saying in our first episode, was just like, my brain doesn't let me perform these tasks, and yet I can fantasize about aspects of that. The revenge element when it comes to something like being kidnapped as a child, raped, these types of things, like I'm usually pretty like sweepingly full stop, yes, absolutely, I would support that type of thing. I will extend my empathy far deeper to the person in that position needing the revenge than to the person that did the thing that made them deserve the revenge. So like, I mean, from case to case, like in this case, I'm 100% in support of this type of story. There might be other circumstances, and maybe a person that's in an upper caste or higher class, and in like Western terms or whatever, I would be less empathetic to them wanting revenge for something. But people that are oppressed, people that are constantly, not even able, like legally within the system they exist in, to have recourse because of something so unfortunate as a genetic roll of the dice. You were born into a lower caste.
And you were born a girl.
I mean, in those cases, there's no way I can't see it. I can't empathize with what she experienced to feel that it was warranted. And even if it goes outside of herself, right? Like, let's say she is aware of another girl in a village who that happened to, and it's that child's rapist.
Yeah.
And she does that act. I would view that still as a vengeance act. I would view that as even a protective act.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what's great about this story is that so what's happened to her has happened, and then she's gone into the gang, and then she's escaped being captured by the gang. At that point, she could have made so many other decisions of what she did. Okay, her life would have gone in a totally different way. But the fact that she decided to continue in this life, but make change the game from within. Again, she's going to change politics, hopefully, but she's changing the game of even the banditry from within and saying, well, we're going to do this Robin Hood thing, and give back. And that is that's remarkable, because she could have just obviously done that and got wealthy and done it all for her own end.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah.
She didn't have to make that choice, but the fact that that's what she did just shows where her head was at when she was carrying out these crimes.
Right. And I want to believe that about myself too. Like, if I were to go down that path, I understand that I exist within a capitalist society, and I've had to work within that for so long. But if I had the opportunity to fight against capitalism in that way, and I had the skill set and I had the knees, the knees and the back, I would want to think that would be the method that I would do too. And in any kind of like fantasy I've ever had as a regular person, when you fantasize about winning the lottery, even though you don't play into the lottery or something like that, it's things like that, finding a way to look after girls and protect them from this type of stuff, or anything that I experienced as a child within, like, I have an abusive childhood, that within those things I would do stuff.
As a victim of childhood sexual abuse, I really sympathized with just the concept of being able to just go on a rampage and kick ass and take it out on all the men who've wronged all the women, because I would really like that in lots of ways still.
In a way that kind of equalizes, like, it's never, justice is never equitable, right? It's either a tit for tat in an individual situation, or it's just like symbolically this is this is retribution or something like that. And I feel when it comes to harming whoever is defenseless compared to you, like, of course, children in general, of course, most women probably, maybe, maybe not all, but I mean, I've certainly met some women that are far more powerful than some of the men that I've met as well. I know that that's a possibility too. But or even if even if it is a man, but it's a man from a lower class, lower caste, lower income, whatever the thing is, and they're up against somebody with more power, same type of thing. Like, that's the side.
Yeah. Always. Yeah. I think that's the thing. It's very clear that where our loyalties are lying. We're always going to go with the ethnic guy and the down person.
Yeah, whatever it is.
I'm always going to support the little guy. And I think that what's interesting though is when we were talking before about the mindset of a killer, and like a serial killer, and why do you just do one, or how are you ticking? Then how are so many of us not killing and going on rampages as a result of things that we've had happen?
That's a good fucking question, right? Like, if you compare
I haven't killed anybody yet.
I haven't done it at all yet.
So well.
if I put us in the mindset of like what we were talking about when we were talking about Graham Young, about like, what makes him different from me, to where he was willing to kill his own family just to be able to observe them dying. In the hopes that in the future he could be this global villain, right? That seems so ridiculous, and yet at the same time, I'm fascinated by why his brain is wired that way.
And it's like delusions of grandeur on this massive scale.
Of grandeur. The accounting for him being a white man, of even if he is lower class, he's going to have a privilege that I don't have. Like all of those things, there. versus a story like this in which I could relate far more, even though I wasn't born in India. I wasn't born at that level of poverty or caste or anything like that. You know, I have my different version of that growing up where I grew up in like the Black American hood and stuff like that. You know, why it seems so ridiculous for someone like Graham to be wired the way he is versus and can you say her name again? I apologize.
Oh yeah, sorry, Phoolan.
And to where with Phoolan, it's like, like all this shit makes sense. Like, and I you know, I'm almost ashamed I'm not as like as brave or as powerful as someone, you know, like she is. That I only have fantasies of the people who have done these things to me as a child, you know, like versus actually doing it. Like that's I think that's a really interesting question to like try to evaluate for yourself. Like, how?
Why haven't I murdered anyone yet?
Why haven't I?
That's what our therapists are dealing with next.
Right. Like, you know, and here we are on the internets, you know, just talking about like, why don't I do this? And again, you know, like the same type of thing, the ability to hide, the ability to disappear, the ability to keep it going even. It's something that like I don't have that know-how or talent to have figured. You know, maybe I would have figured it out on the fly. I don't know.
It seems like she pretty much figured it out on the way up, right? You know, she's thrust into this life of crime by necessity, and then she happens to be pretty good at it. You know, so the fact that they let a woman be in charge after they killed the other dude, and that because she just obviously had a way with it, and she was a good leader, and she was doing well. She obviously was learning things and picking it up. She was astute.
I really love that so many men followed her after. I'm fascinated by like what was the deal for them versus those upper class guys that were like, what the fuck? Like, how can you be out of the game for so long and then come back and have the audacity to be like, I'm going to change shit, you know, like where these other guys were like, you know, she makes sense. So I'm going to keep going. Like, you know,
well,
that's another
if she
thing.
Was successful and she's sharing the wealth, then they're doing better under her rule than they were before. Maybe they're seeing more of the spoils.
And, maybe that's enough, right?
Or maybe she's not kidnapping them and raping them and murdering them when they do stuff that she doesn't like the other guy was.
Yeah, fair. So, and you know, maybe there's not like a weird kind of corporal punishment system within the way she runs the game versus you know, because I think, you know, a lot of people do go through, a lot of Westerners go through their mafia phase, you know, know, where they're really interested in it. Like, you know, some of them is the whole reason why they went to film school. But, you know, like, you know, what I think makes us idolize that kind of criminality is the idea that like you are working outside of the structures, the oppressive structures around us. And even though they have their own oppressive structures within them too, at the end of the day, the people that you seem to hear about having more like an idolization or like the most loyal followers or something like that are the ones that see the humanity of the people that are supporting them, who do share the wealth, you know, things like that or whatever.
But I mean, because obviously they you know, it's honor amongst thieves, isn't it? Because it's like we're honorable in our systems and ways of working, even though we're being dishonorable against the
societally.
Yeah, totally. I mean, because a very early screenplay that I wrote was literally the female mafia boss. You know,
I got one of those too.
Yeah, we all got one, right? I mean, I think because that's fantastical. That's the fantasy. That's the dream. It's like, imagine the badass woman who decides to, you know, she's suddenly thrust in the position of head of the family.
And I think there was, and I forget how old I was at the time. I was somewhere between, say, like 17 to 23, I think. And there was a show that was really briefly running where it was like the female mafia, like the wives or daughters. Oh,
yeah, I mean, it's been done. That's why I
and I remember it being on there, and it didn't last long because, you know, patriarchy and shit like that.
Sure.
But while it was available, that those little juices were turning about like how the structures that they had to deal with is first getting the men in line, because you can't wield the fear of death, I guess, or I mean you could, but like in a lot of cases, that wasn't the way that they willed. It was more the promise of riches was how they got people in line. And maybe, that is what happens.
Maybe that works here. Because if she was actually better at her job, then they would be seeing more.
With me, you're going to eat, you're going to have space to be and freedom, maybe even that you can speak up without, not fear of, slaughter or something like that.
I think that would be a really interesting insight, would be to be able to go within and see what that dynamic was like, which obviously we haven't got that information.
Yeah, I would definitely love to know more about the internal structure. That's the hardest part about some of these stories that we're going to end up reviewing is the stuff that you actually want to know, the stuff you want more access to is like not the stuff that people would have written about, or like in our case, like culturally, the things that would make us curious about how this structure survives wouldn't be something that necessarily Western people, even though we're born in Western society and we exist as Western, that wouldn't necessarily be the way a Westerner would choose to investigate. And therefore, because that information is not available to us and the people that we need to find out about are dead, we're not going to know. It almost makes me feel like I get why some serial murderers do document so much because of that arrogance where they want you to know everything, but they don't want you to know.
That's Graham again, isn't it? Because
and we're back to Graham.
And
I've seen that in a lot of other things, like even like BTK here in the US, like the way he would release information out to the press, it was a frustration of like, my genius is not being appreciated because you dummies don't know how to identify it. And so here, let me tell you more, which is eventually going to get me caught. But it's just because I need you to be able to see how brilliant I am. And in this case, that probably wouldn't have been, it's probably not about genius and brilliance as the reason why they're doing things. It's really more about like the humanity of the people that they're looking after, or themselves, that they were doing what they were doing. And so I even wonder, like, how would they tell their own story?
And I think from a female perspective, that sort of desire for that kind of notoriety isn't as strong, probably. That is sweeping stereotype, obviously, but I would say in general it's not. And I think that's why it's really interesting what her comment was about the film that had been made, because so somebody took her story and told it, and this is what they made of it, and she was saying, no, that's not me. Like, you can't, how could, and in fact, how could you take this story? I've seen clips, I haven't seen the whole thing, but how could you tell this story that I've just told and we've gone, whoa, about this woman, this badass, and then you've just gone, oh, I was sad because all these bad things happened to me. And then what? And then so you just missed out the whole bit where she like opened up the rifle and took revenge.
Right. Like, what sense does that make?
That
you can have such a dynamic. I think that's also like almost like the Disneyfication of like Mulan.
God, yeah.
I mean, this is a woman who the stories about her are like her giving birth on the battlefield, or literally still draining birth fluids, and she's like holding the head of an enemy and stuff like that. Like these are the more like they might be fantasy, I don't know, but like these are the more like stories from them. And here they have Disney has her like fawning over a boy while she's
course
fighting in battle, and not that you don't have sexual or romantic feelings when you're in such situations like that, but like that's the focus of her story, that now collectively the world will always associate
teenage
with her.
Girls know there's a time and a place for that kind of thing.
You know what I'm saying? But like, I kind of like the idea of the woman who's like just given birth. She's got a suckling infant and she's on horseback and she's slicing people's heads off like that, give her the dignity of
Isabella of Spain, right?
Yes.
Right. There's this image of her. She's, because she's wearing a suit of armor and riding into battle and saying like, sod off, men, I can do this myself better than you. And that,
she was actually the monarch that had power. She just happened to also have a husband that
Ferdinand, he's around for when I need certain things.
But that actually kind of makes me curious, even though you cannot compare something like Elizabeth II to something like Isabella, but like 100 years from now, the dynamic between Philip as a lesser,
Oh yeah. So
compared to her, like how will that be told?
So I
100
think,
years
I
from
mean,
now?
already the suggested dynamic there is that you might wear the crown, but I wear the trousers at home, kind of thing.
Right.
So he's in charge of the family and the home, and he's the boss there, even though she's the queen boss of
Which just
everyone
reads
else.
so insecure to me.
Yeah. But also, I'm off shagging everybody I want whenever I want, because that's also part of the deal, because I get to do that because I'm a man. I'm going to be
Right.
powerful in that way and dominate in that way.
Yeah.
Which I think is well documented and well established. But I think that he doesn't come across as
There's no actual part of him that comes about even remotely respectable when it comes to any tier of the from her ascension to their deaths.
I think here it's been overly romanticized, the fact that we'd just been through COVID when it was his funeral and she sat alone, the weeping widow at the funeral, and there was, and there was, that was just so overblown in all our media here. The image of the strong and steadfast monarch alone, at her husband's funeral was, and it was stark, and it was quite a powerful image, but it was really overblown. Obviously it was always going to be, and then of course it was really overshadowed with Meghan, and that was like, obviously that's a whole other chapter. So I do think that their relationship, I suppose that they cared for each other. I'm not really sure. I feel like they led very separate lives. I was always led to believe that they had very separate lives, different apartments. They didn't have that much contact with each other, apart from some sort of companionship, which probably maybe that worked.
I think a lot of those level of political relationships, and I don't not see a parallel in kind of the way mine is after 23 years too, is that there's a certain level where you're together for a reason. This is the reason, we are monarchs or we are politicians or whatever. But then to a degree that they're also great friends, even though they've caused harm to each other to a degree. I think the Clintons also in the United States would be an equivalent to that kind of thing, where they definitely have a political marriage, and yet when the cameras that they're not aware of are on them, they look like very good friends. And even maybe affectionate in a standoffish kind of like, let's make
and I'm
sure
sure there's a respect going on.
And it's like, I think the Clinton rule was just like, don't embarrass me publicly, oops, kind of a thing. And I
had one job, Bill.
you just had one job, right? And I assume the British monarchy was like that as well. It's just like, don't.
Yeah, exactly. Don't put your dirty laundry out for everyone to see. And then every time it gets in the papers and the tabloids, it's embarrassing me. I mean, at least the Queen had the good grace and dignity to have her affairs very much behind closed doors. So she was getting what she needed and not telling everyone about it.
Yeah. And, when her diaries are finally released, at some point people are like, oh,
I say,
horse friend, did you say? Like,
riding companion, is it?
Riding companion, indeed. Whereas like monarchs from the past, or something like that. Or even like in the case of this, like as much as I am kind of tired of any like powerful woman needing to have a romance as a part of her tale, at the same time, I also felt like at least she had a Vikram. At least she had a man that didn't do this thing to her.
Exactly.
And also supported her mission. And from what it seems, didn't need to take the lead. The band in the gang.
Absolutely, because he was in the gang first. And so when she joined, so it could very well have been that he assumed the natural leadership role.
Sure.
Because he had been there first and was the man, but obviously he was happy to,
And so like, I love it that it happened. Also at the same time, it's like literally a part of every woman's story. Every powerful woman's story is who's the guy too.
I know.
So it's a mixed thing, but I mean
that's why it's kind of romantic if she did name her gang after him.
Yes,
that is kind of romantic, and perhaps it does speak to a sort of a childlike romanticism because probably of everything that she'd been through, and if she as well, you see there's this other element there, isn't there? She's had this much older husband, her parents are sort of kicking her out and don't really care, so like having a person who's sort of first and foremost thinking is to protect or look after you has not been something she's experienced,
which I think is why it's such a good part of the story. It's like maybe she had the one
exactly.
And I can see other other stories and things like that where something like that would be the case. Like this person stood up for you and protected you and was kind. And I think kindness is probably such an important part because it's so often not a part of the woman's story.
So at first I thought, okay, but were they really in love, or was it just that, that actually this is the first time that's ever happened to me and that's really appealing, and I've misread, my feeling of gratitude about that about you not mistreating me as being in love, which is a really common story.
It's possible,
but actually reading more into it and realizing no, they were properly in love. Like I just think that awesome. Is actually in this case that's awesome. I love that for her.
Definitely had a misguided crush on a boy that was kind, once I get removal from it, I'm just like, man, is that really how low the bar was? Because like
oh my God,
maybe they weren't that smart, or maybe we didn't actually have anything in common, but they were just a nice person,
just not being an absolute dick.
Like amazing, but that's how low the bar can be sometimes. But I really thank you for sharing this one, because I don't think I would have stumbled on it even accidentally. It's certainly not a part of any of the stories I've heard before, but now I absolutely want to know more about her, and I want that big one titty painting on my wall of her in a power position.
I've got some good photos, so you'll see.
Excellent. I can't wait.
That will satisfy you.
It's so funny because now, for years, I've been like gathering pieces of art that are from my various fandoms and stuff like that are unlicensed things, but like stuff that artists have made or whatever. And my plan is to end up having them, kind of gallery style on my wall. And as we're doing this, there's times when like a story like hers, would I end up having like I respect this murderess gallery wall? Like, I mean, I was a teenager that had like Angela Davis and Muhammad Ali on my wall. Like, would I also have, because of the respect of their politics, but like, would I also have like, she killed dudes who harmed girls? I kind of want to idolize a person like that,
So there we go. And so like I said, I think it isn't a usual tale of murder.
I love
straightforwardly.
Honestly, if we could find more stories like this, that would be probably far more heartening than like.
Well, it's good to mix it up every now and again.
Sure,
Who doesn't love just pure bloodthirsty, slashing at times?
Right.
There's always room for that as well. So
it's so bizarre. Yeah, I've just heard one that I don't know if I would cover, but it's one of those ones where like multiple people end up saying that they're the person who did it. There's a belief about maybe why, but like the crime is so weird and senseless that you're just like, why is this of all things the one that so many people wanted to take claim over? But it's like it's in, well, I guess it's in the 70s too, so the more that I'm trying to stick to the further past, I keep ending up in like the 60s and 70s.
So that's what obviously with this one I was like, oh, this is so recent because we were alive.
I mean, technically they start before we got going, like I was born in 77, so but like at the same time it's just the fact that you can kind of touch that history is also an interesting thing.
And then when you think about the justice and the, especially with this story, the prison system and all of that, and realizing just how not long ago it was that she's, literally languishing in prison without trial, that also brings a different dimension.
So much of history within any kind of crime type of story is like you really telling me shit ain't changed that much? You know,
Yeah,
like,
yep,
I mean,
yep.
and this one, of course, is, 50, 60 years, but like you go 100 years and same type of thing. You go 200 years, the same type of thing. And
Yeah.
it's so disheartening to think that like we can't get it together enough to have like some kind of collective justice process that actually provides either a comfort to victim
Yeah.
families and a decent enough punishment or something that makes sense for punishment to the
Yeah.
perpetrator. And to see the injustice of punishment of people who have done dirt, but
Mhm.
the reason why they had to do the dirt is because of what atrocities happened,
Yeah.
And that's a special place in my heart because I'm, as a person from multiple different oppressed categories,
Mhm.
a lot of the times of the justice that's being done to the
Yeah.
people from my communities is not
Yeah, exactly.
justice, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, this was amazing. I really appreciate this story, and I'm categorically a pessimist and not a hopeful person. I very much lean into it's the hope that kills you, way of thinking. But like something like this actually does kind of like, is this what hope feels like?
This fuzzy little feeling. I always describe myself as cynically optimistic because I am a really optimistic person, but I am also very cynical. So I'm not just willy-nilly like everything's going to be a-okay because I'm Pollyanna and I'm so glad. But I just so yeah, I've got a healthy amount of cynicism, but a really good dose of optimism as well. So I'm glad that I could, shed a little pink and fuzzy onto you with this story.
To quote you from before, you have well and truly spilled the tea on this, and I was very much steeped in intrigue. I'm already just thinking about that I'm gonna look her up after this to try to learn more. I definitely can't wait to see a picture of her.
Yes. And let's have all little girls telling her name and her tale for years to come.
Like we have such strange heroes
Yeah.
that are like collectively approved.
Yeah, yeah.
And if she was amongst them, I wouldn't hate that. The patron saint of you rape little girls, you're gonna get the knife. I'm with it. I'm with it.
So we'll have to start the fan club. Merch coming soon.
For real. So yeah, let's go ahead and start to, I guess, wrap it up. We are so just to update, because this will be the first time I don't have to cut it out and re-record it. If you want to follow us on the social medias, we are Matcha, Masala, Murder on all the platforms, on the YouTube, the TikTok, the Instagram, or at least those are the 3 platforms that we were focusing on. You can find us on all of the podcatchers as well, but we have a specific request that if you can download and listen to us on Spotify, that you please do, because that is where we're hosted, and hopefully we will start to be able to pay ourselves a wage in future. Do you have any final thoughts, words?
Vive la Revolution!
Exactly. Stab the masters.
Okay, so this is good. Thank you. And next week we'll be back, and it will be your turn to be mother and spill the tea, and we will see what wonderful stories you have for us. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Matcha and Masala is produced and hosted by Sharmane Fury and Rhia Kaur.
This is a Main Hustle Media production in association with Virtual Reality Studios. All stories are researched to the best of our ability, with information freely available to the public.
This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes, and due to the nature of true life crimes, some information remains inaccessible and new information can come to light after recording.